a little note at the beginning. This is not my presentation. I've been involved in setting it up and preparing it for a group of scholars, which is a group of highly gifted and talented students at the British School in Kazakhstan, together with an organization called Fashion Revolution Kazakhstan. For anyone who doesn't know it, Fashion Revolution is a global movement. We've got Fashion Revolution in Portugal sitting and helping. I've now, obviously being and working in Kazakhstan, I've hooked up with Fashion Revolution Kazakhstan. We've got that in the UK. Almost every country in the world has it. And there's a lovely coincidence. One member of Fashion Revolution Kazakhstan is a young woman who is now studying in St. Martin's. And she has graduated from Haileybury Almaty, where I'm now teaching. She was a head girl there. And it's quite a nice coincidence that we must have passed each other in the air. She's come to London to study fashion now at St. Martin's, and I'm going over to her old school and holding up the flag. So if the presentation isn't 100% smooth, forgive me, it's not my presentation. I'm jumping in for that young lady who wanted to do it, but she had to fly back to Kazakhstan for some family emergency. Now, having said that, it's not my presentation, it's my topic. That is one of the reasons I went into and started Little Hands Design 20 years ago, to show people fashion isn't a shallow thing, only if you make it so. And what really annoyed me is that children go to school every day. They have all these separate subjects, maths, physics, chemistry, biology, but where do they apply it? And for me, what we do at Little Hands is applied science. That's what we want to get the kids excited about, to give them a motivation and to see, well, I thought I'm not good at math, but if I actually listen at school and I can then create a really exciting pattern for something to wear or for a bag to make, then I know why I'm learning it for. So if you go to the next slide, we want to look at what scientists do behind the scene to create all the stuff we are wearing, and to maybe get you, I mean, I know if you are Little Hands students, you're anyway convinced, but to get you to think about away from fashion is about being pretty. Fashion is about this shallow stuff of buying things, but to dive deeper and understand the science behind it and the academic sort of thinking about body image, about material properties, about using your brain to express yourself. Okay, next one. Yeah, that's boring. Next one, sorry. So subjects at school. All these subjects you need if you want to become a good fashion designer. That is not what people think. People who start at Little Hands, young girls, boys, a lot of them say, oh, I want to be a fashion designer. And when I ask them, what skills do you think you need to have to be a fashion designer? The first question is, oh, I need to be able to draw. I can't draw. I'm more a sculpture. I'm more 3D. So there is already the first misconception. There are fashion designers like Shilpa, we've just had the lecture, who does do a lot of doodling. She's a fantastic fashion illustrator. I don't design like that. I take a dummy and I sculpt. So first misconception in terms of what skills you need. The second one, people say, oh, well, I suppose I should know just how to make stuff. And again, misconception. What are you using to make stuff? How could you design an outfit made with a laser cutter if you don't know how a laser cutter works? How could you design something which really clings to your body as opposed to stand up if you don't know the properties of your material? Cutting on the bias, you know what that is, don't you? Do you know what that is, cutting on the bias? It's when you cut on the diagonal of a fabric because you're using a different direction of the weave of the material, which makes it suddenly, I can look at a dress and I can tell you whether it's cut on the bias or just cut 90 degrees, 45 degrees. Okay, we've got something in school which is called STEM subjects. Does anyone know what that stands for? You know, Penelope. Come on. Science, technology, engineering, maths, the really serious stuff. It's old school. We are trying to canvas to have the A in there for arts, because anyone who's I've ever taught before knows I always say, you cannot be a really good scientist, a really good academic, if you can't solve problems creatively. And where do you learn those creative problem-solving skills? Is in the creative subjects, in design and technology and the arts. Okay, so STEAM is what all the schools should be pushing for, and for some obscure reason, doesn't really cut through in most of the schools. So all of you who are still at school, talk to your teachers, tell them about STEAM. It's really important because it will make science, technology, engineering, and math 10 times more interesting if it's combined with the force of creative problem solving from the arts. Next one. So, this looks rather boring, doesn't it? But it actually isn't, because have you ever taken a piece of fabric and thought, this doesn't stretch, but I want to make a pair of leggings, so I need something stretchy. So you take a piece of stretchy material, and you kind of try to stretch it, and yes, it stretches one way, but not the other. And then you have a piece of material which stretches whichever way you pull it. Now, how does that work? And could you imagine yourself? My daughter studies urban dance, you know, hip hop and all that stuff. She needs stretchy stuff, which stretches in all directions. Otherwise, she can't move. So she needs a material with the property of all-round stretch. Now, how does that work? Everything around you is made up of little tiny pieces, protons, electrons, neutrons, atoms, whatever. And it's sorry, that's not very scientific, but we want to kind of make it visual. And it's literally like Lego. If you remember playing with Lego, if you staple the Legos one way and then you give it a push, it falls over. If you stack the Legos like this into a tower and you try to do this, it's much harder to do. Try it out. The science of those little tiny pieces is all about. So whether a material is stretchy or non-stretchy depends on how you structure those tiny, 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 tiny pieces. Okay, next one. So let's look at what that means for some materials. Now, graphene. Anyone knows something you probably use every day, which is graphene in it. Pencils. Yes. Oh, sorry. I shouldn't have done that. Yes. I'm getting so excited when I talk about science. Graphene in our pencils. So graphene is a material. And it's been discovered. Sorry. That you can use it to make conductive material. It's like a sort of, you know, the honeycomb structure. So just picture it as that. It's like a two-dimensional, just one atom thick, tiny, tiny, tiny. Can you imagine a scientist discovering that and thinking, ooh, I know what I'll do with that. If you go down. I know what I do with that. I take that one atom thick honeycomb structure, I bond it with another material, and that makes fabric which can conduct heat from the warmer parts of your body to the colder parts of your body. In Almaty, where I live now, in Kazakhstan, it gets really cold in winter, like -17 we had some days. You need to dress up warm, and guess what is always cold? The ends, hands and feet. So if you're wearing a coat which can conduct the heat away from where it's always warm towards the end of your limbs, how cool is that? Something that you can put on and it literally distributes your body heat. I find that fascinating. There is a company who's already doing it. It's called the, I don't actually know how to pronounce that, Folloback. So, one thing where I think that application of what we learn at school is what I find is really exciting, and what I think is often missing at schools, this kind of, yeah, but what for? I certainly have gone through a schooling system thinking my math skills aren't very good, it's just not me, I can't do math. Until I discovered pattern cutting. I wanted to become an architect and kind of veered off. Pattern cutting is basically trigonometry. And suddenly, I thought maths was the most exciting subject because I could see where I could apply it. I started Little Hands, which is a business. Suddenly, I had to apply numbers to make sense. And it turns out I was quite good at it. I managed to keep us going for like 20 years as a business. Okay, next slide. So this is how it's done with that. You have the raw material, you put it into these really, really thin kind of like pellets. You blend it with polyethylene, which is an oil-based material, and then you have that membrane, which you then put together with another material, and that's the fabric. So it's actually, once you've thought it through, it's quite easy. But it takes a scientist, with someone who's actually listened, and maths, physics, and all the other science to come up with that. Next one. So, spider webs. Really interesting one. Did you know that weight for weight, a spider web is basically almost stronger than steel? Again, I find that really, really, really exciting. Now, there's a whole area in science which is called biomimicry, where we look at nature. And I really love that because it is another way of how we can reconnect and see us as part of nature. If we look at how clever things are done in nature and then learn from that. So if we look at the spider web, and we think about what we just talked about, that graphene structure and the spider web, how that teaches us how to make materials which are really, really strong. Okay. Another thing where the spider web comes in, they're almost making like a thread, don't they, spiders? When you look at the graphene we talked about, you add a little bit of water, you look at how the spiders are doing it, you end up with this material, which they say that when you then spin silk from that material, that it ends up being 5 times stronger than Kevlar, which is considered to be one of the strongest materials ever on Earth. Up to now. I'm sure there's more innovations to come. And how does that help us? That we can spin silk with such a strong property, learning from the spiders, learning from materials like graphene. It helps us making things which need to be really durable. If you think about parachutes, they need to be durable. You want to know that if you're coming down in a parachute, it holds you. So this spider spun silk is used for parachutes, is used for ropes, and things like cables, which need to be really strong. Okay, next one. A whole other area, that's more chemistry, I suppose. We buy often stuff because we like the color, we like the pattern of it. Now imagine you could have a dress which on the day you feel really happy, has your favorite color on it. On your day you feel a little bit gloomy, has another color on it. And you don't have to change the dress. You just use a certain material which changes color, depending on temperature or depending on sending little messages. So let me see, where are we? Yes, here. So look at this. Imagine this is a thread. And inside the thread is a tiny, tiny, tiny wire which allows messages to be sent through. So I'm wearing something, I feel a little bit blue. Oh, my dress is blue. I think that's incredibly exciting and huge fun. And in terms of being a designer, you don't need 5 dresses in your wardrobe. In the future, you might only need 1 dress, but which can change pattern, which can change color, and maybe also can change shape. That is for you, future designers, to then come up with, because I think that's not possible yet. Anyway, can we click on this? This is the company who specializes in these color-changing fabrics. Is this a picture you would have thought looks like if you want to become a fashion designer? It's not, is it? So these are the threads which are being used. These are the happy employees. And that's the final result. And most people only start to think about fashion designers from that point. They already have the material. Well, how dull is that if you don't actually know how the material is made and you didn't have any say about how it's been made? So here's an example, not of a dress, but of a bag, which changes pattern and color, depending on these little messages. There's also, I forgot the name of the designer. There is a brand where they work with fabrics which change color when it starts raining. Again, I find that really cool. Imagine you wear your dress, you go out, it's raining. Ooh. A little bit of fun. Yeah, if you go to the next, no, the next slide, just go out of it. Penelope, did you do at your school, you're Southampton, aren't you? Did you do anything about thermographics? That is that fabric where when you change temperature, it's like basically like a paint. So that is something everyone can do at home. You don't need a lab for that. You can buy paint, which is called thermographic paint. You paint it on anything, your clothes. So imagine you're wearing a denim jacket. You're using some thermographic paint. One project I did with students was we did coasters, you know, where you put your hot drink on. And as you put the hot drink on, the coaster changes colors. And you can even, we did in design and technology, we did a sort of placemat where we had noughts and crosses, because wherever you put your hot cup on, it changed color, and you could play like noughts and crosses. It's very, very similar. It's basically that is thermographic paint. But you can buy it in retail. It's not expensive wildly, but you can experiment at home or here at Little Hands. Maybe we should get some in, and literally just having existing clothing and using that paint and change your existing clothing. Now, a completely other area, and again, I find that really, really exciting, because we are teaching children as young as 8 up to adults. Now, children grow, and we've heard the girl from Swap Up, the young woman from Swap Up, talking about the problem that when you're young, you're constantly growing and outgrowing stuff. Now, imagine you had clothes which just grew with you. Now, there is a company who's doing that very cleverly. Just go over to the next one. And look at this. The person, the designer who came up with this idea, worked in aeronautics. Nautics? I don't know how to say that properly. Anyway, an engineer came up with the idea that surely it can't be that tricky to design a fabric which stretches. But then shrinks back to the size you needed. And they've done these children's wear because that's where, when babies are grown, that's the time when they most change in the shortest amount of time. So you have, I don't know how many, 7 sizes. 7 sizes, I think that's from newborn up to age 3. Now, if you have younger siblings, or you still maybe in your family have stuff from when you were a baby, there's a huge amount of clothes which a little person wears for a very short amount of time, because then they've grown and it doesn't fit anymore. So imagine you have something when you're growing up which grows with you. Obviously, you need to know about science to be able to do that. Right. Yeah, the next one. What do you think the material is made from? Any guesses? To have that property that it has these folds which can extend but shrink back to its original size. Is it a man-made material or is it a natural material? First question. Guesses?
First question. Guesses? No.
So we're pretty divided on the issue, aren't we? How do you think they get the folds in? So we can establish something man must have done to that fabric, because the folds don't come naturally. It is actually made from recycled plastic bottles. So it is in itself not a natural material. And we've heard Shilpa saying a key sentence: there is no such thing as 100% sustainable product, because everything we do has a consequence, has a footprint. And I think that is really, really important for you guys to remember. The world isn't black and white. Yes, this is extremely exciting. And I think a designer who doesn't just think about one problem, i.e. the growing over time, needing so many clothes, but also thinks about where is the material I'm using coming from? What, is it a raw material? Because plastic bottles are made out of oil. There is only so much oil in the world. When that is gone, it's gone. But to say, on the other hand, loads of people before me have used that oil. It is now in the form of a plastic bottle. I can put it back into the process. And that's what we mean when we talk about a circular economy. So plastic bottles, are they evil? Some people may think so. But I think about it as waste as a resource. So for me, when I teach about design to young people, that's my first sort of mantra. Do not think waste, do think resource. And here the resource is waste because it's plastic bottles. Right, next one, biomaterials. Okay, very exciting. Just think about mushrooms growing. Another difficult English word, I never know how to say, how do you call these roots? Mycelium something? You know what I mean, the roots of a mushroom. You can train them to grow in a certain way that they get this interwoven structure, which is basically what fabric is anyway. It's threads of stuff which is woven in certain directions. How cool is that? You could have a little farm of mushrooms at home, and you guide the roots to grow in a certain way that you then cut off the mushrooms, you eat the mushrooms, and then you pick up that layer of the roots, and it's fabric. And it's obviously biodegradable because it's 100% natural. And it's surprisingly strong. Think about the spider's webs. So all sorts of things we can do with that. One is, that's the word. How do you say this? How do you pronounce this in English? Mycelium. 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 Right, learn something again. Mycelium. Okay. Two really interesting words in here. So it's made from mushroom roots, basically. But look at this. Look at this. Indoor vertical farming facilities. That is basically the future, if you think about so many problems to do with food, sustainability. Why? Why is indoor vertical farming
Grow the absorb the toxins from the atmosphere.
I think I'm jumping too quickly. I'm getting so excited about this stuff. Penelope?
So excited about this stuff. Penelope?
Yeah. A huge problem is probably what you meant. A huge problem we have at the moment is that we are taking more and more and more and more land to produce food. And then we waste a third of this. Isn't that a shocking statistics that a third of the food we're producing gets wasted? So by going indoors, and just think about this place, that one proposal before the Mosaic School came in here was to use the garages for indoor mushroom farming, which is why I think I made that link just now. So they wanted to put a mushroom farm in here because mushrooms don't really need light. There's loads and loads and loads of buildings all over London, which are old car parks, which could be converted into vertical farming, which uses more than one problem coming back to, as a designer, always try to not just solve one problem. Always try to solve more than one problem, which also will make you more successful and a happier person. Right. Just go back to that picture. So what they've done here, that is leather. Yeah, so it's not leather because leather is an animal skin, but it's a material which has the properties, i.e. the characteristics, as if it would be an animal skin. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying not to kill so many animals, so just so that we can wear our leather shoes, but it is a fantastic material, leather. We don't want to do without it because it is so useful for so many things. Most of us are wearing shoes made out of leather. So to have a leather which isn't from an animal, but still has all those useful benefits, is brilliant. I actually got another leather out. Oh, that comes later, actually. I'm not going to show you yet. Sorry. Next one. So what they're doing is, going back to that mycelia, which I now know, they feed that. So imagine you're at home, you have your little mushroom garden now. Obviously, the mushrooms need some food. They're giving it sawdust and some organic material and regulating what humidity, so how much moisture, how much water there is in the air, temperature, etc. And then it grows into that layer. I was talking about it, and then you take it off, and it's literally your own grown fabric. There's another way, not on the slideshow, there's another way where, imagine if you bath at home. There's a certain bacteria you can put in the bath, add a little bit of water, check the pH levels, etc. And the bacteria multiply, and they multiply until they have the shape of the bath. And then you lift it up, and again, it's this leather-like material. And I've actually, there was an exhibition at the V&A where I was actually able to touch and feel it. It's fascinating. You look at it and you think, it looks a bit like pig skin. But, I mean, that is the first step to then say, well, we don't need to kill the cow. We can just use our bathtub at home. Right, okay. Next. Plant-based leather. So this was leather made from mycelia, from mushroom roots. But meanwhile, you can make leather, or leather-like material, from almost anything. So this one here, for example, is made out of pineapple. So what I really like about material like that is we have a huge problem in the world with food waste. Think about cutting up a pineapple. How much of the actual pineapple with the leaves on top you really eat, and how much of that you throw in the food bin. Now imagine you'd be at home, you're munching your pineapple, you've got your little pile of leftovers, you've got a little like food processor thing where you can run it through, make your fibers, and hey presto, you have your own little clutch bag material in the making, so you can pass it around, just feel it. One thing it doesn't do though, doesn't smell like leather. I, for example, really like the smell of leather, so almost all the other properties are there apart from the smell, which is obviously a very distinct one. So imagine that. Banana peel turned into leather, coconut leather, apple skin. My husband has got a glass case made out of leather made from apple base dough, is from a Dutch designer. Cactus, all sorts of things. Going to the next one. That is, yeah, Pinatex is what we're just sort of sending around. It's just showing you a little bit how it's being done. What I like about that illustration is it shows you again that kind of circular economy idea. So we constantly hear about growth economy, that we need to, that progress is the GDP grows. Now, I would say to you, if you are a young designer setting out, or you have a business idea, like if I don't know whether you're here for the Swap It Up and Refashion lecture, 2 businesses, doesn't have to be just a designer, but so much of around us, of what we hear is that everything has to be growing. And I would wish for that talk to be changed into a more circular talk of saying, we don't need to necessarily grow. We need to be able to look after ourselves, to look after our children, and for them to be looking after their children on a what we need basis, not what we want basis. And as soon as you, I started off as an economist, if you start thinking, hi Shana, if you start thinking in terms of running a business, of saying, whatever I take out, it needs to go back in, what you find is the whole profile of how to become a designer or how to become a business, the whole process of running a business, making a product changes because you're working on what is called a cradle-to-cradle principle. And that is something which, again, I'm hoping we at Little Hands pushing through a lot, that we'll be talking about. So, but where does this come from? Where will it go to introduce that circular idea? Right. The spiders again. Microsilk. There is a designer. If I say, name me a sustainable fashion designer, who comes to mind? Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. That was exactly what I was hoping for, because if you go to the next picture, Stella McCartney, that's what she designed with this spider-inspired microsilk. Very cool stuff. Not that the gentleman could wear that, but I'm sure we could adapt to the design to that. And the next one, again, that goes now into bioengineering. So it's a lab over of biology and engineering, genetics. If you put yeast, which is what we normally use to make bread, into the genes of a material, the proteins which are produced through that then lead you to that microsilk. Maybe they should have been the other way around. Anyway, so how do you get that microsilk? You look at, I want to have something very strong. You got the inspiration from your spider web. Then you have some manipulation of the genes, which produce a protein, which can then spin that microsilk, which Stella McCartney is then using. And she is a really interesting designer, because what she is very good at is to go right to the micro level of what is my fabric made from. So I think that is her biggest strength. She's obviously also a really, really good designer, but her ability to say, I start right at the bottom. Where does it grow? Where does it come from? How is it made? And does that lie within how I want to build up my business? Right, next one, that is my absolute favorite. It sort of brings together a few of the things I was just talking about. Hands up, who would wear this? I would. Pair of sneakers, they look very comfortable. Now, but if you look at it, it's made from dog hair. The first time I looked at it, I thought, it's a bit strange, something made from dog hair. But that's what we do for centuries. We take animals, we shear their hair off, and then we turn it into something wearable. No one thinks, when they put on their woolly jumper, do they? So maybe it is just because it's new and we don't really, haven't had time to get our head around. But, so this is a sneaker where the sole comes from that mushroom stuff I was talking earlier, which you now all got a farm at home from. And Then you take dog hair, which you can knit, I think it's even 3D knitted, into the top. Now, we actually have a connection to the person who designed that, and I think there's the interview on there. So if you, but honestly, that story of this young designer just gone out of university is very, very inspiring, breaking through that typical image of a fashion designer. So for those of you who want to see the whole thing, just send us an email and we will email out the link. Right, we are now on the third one, recycled materials. If you go down, we've already touched on it with the grow fashion. We have now a huge problem, which is actually a huge opportunity. Huge problem of single-use plastic floating out of anywhere, everywhere in the world, which is also a huge opportunity because it's a fantastic resource. There is a reason why people made so many things out of plastic. And to just say plastic is bad is actually a little bit misleading, because we need to look at material properties and the reasoning for why we got to where we are now. And one of the reasons is that plastic has fantastic material properties. And if we can think in terms of circular economy to bring that back, and instead of taking the oil out of the earth, to take the oil out of the bottle and reuse it, then what suddenly is a problem becomes an exciting opportunity. Next one. So this is a little bit how it's been done. So you take a plastic bottle, certain steps you have to obviously go through. And if you look at all those steps, again, ask a young person who comes to Little Hands and says, I want to become a fashion designer. They don't talk about stuff like that, but that is part of designing fashion. Next one. So what can be recycled apart from plastic bottles? Because that's not the only thing. I have recently read something about fishing nets in the ocean, which the person who wrote the article actually claimed that that is a bigger problem than all the plastic floating about. Obviously, fishing is a huge industry, and these nets are poly-based, which just means they're also made out of oil, but you can recycle it. And there's some really, really exciting designs. We'll show you a couple. Look at this, underwear made out of fishing nets. How cool is that? Next one. Sunglasses, bags. There's no end to what you can turn recycled fishing nets, plastic bottles. What else was on the list? Let's just go back. Nylon. Where were we using nylon? Anyone?
Where are we using nylon?
Think of a product which is made of nylon, which often breaks.
Think of a product which is made of nylon.
Women wear it.
Breaks.
Tights.
Women
would be
wear
one.
it.
It's not the only one, but you know. Old carpets. Who would have thought that you could recycle old carpets? Okay, so back to the examples. We've got these ones. And then DIY recycling, another really interesting area. So not just thinking about, here's a material, I take it apart, I redesign it into something new, but think about all the materials which go into the fabric to make it an exciting fabric for fashion. It's a lot of color, isn't it? And you know the problem of chemicals dyeing. We've talked in Little Hands about that. In Bangladesh, they're saying they can say what this season's favorite color is by just looking at the color of the rivers. How awful is that if you think about it? But now you've worn this and it doesn't fit anymore, it's broke. What do? You could remake it, but you could also take the color out of it. And again, you wouldn't be able to do that if you don't understand anything about science. So this is literally a lab project of extracting, if you go to the next page, look at this, destined for landfill. Stuff which just lies around. Every country has that. If you've ever been to a landfill, you completely rethink the whole topic. And then you take out the dye out of it and you reuse the dye. Who would have thought that that's possible? I think that's fascinating. I look at everything colored now and I'm thinking, I wonder And I always have this picture of like a syringe of taking out the, obviously it's not done like that, but that thought process of thinking, yeah, it may be useless and not at all variable anymore, but there is still some use in it. Next one. Right, 3D printing. What do you think is exciting about 3D printing? Why would we get excited about that? Any ideas? What's one of the big advantages about 3D printing? Dior.
I guess you can make something.
Yeah, so you cut out a whole manufacturing thing where people have to physically sit at the sewing machine. Yeah, you. Physically sit at the sewing machine. Yeah, you.
Accuracy and
It's the accuracy because it's computer driven. Yeah, very good.
Because it's computer driven.
And
Yeah, very good.
zero waste.
And
So if you imagine I'm wearing a t-shirt, which I don't, but imagine I wear a t-shirt. The traditional way of pattern cutting is you cut out and everything under my sleeves is waste. So in the traditional pattern cutting way, 25% of the fabric, which has been, laboriously grown by farmers, produced in big factories, then cut up, made into fabric, is then just wasted. With 3D cutting, 3D printing, you can go around that. So you can, the sneakers, for example, I thought they were actually 3D printed. Did she say that in the video? Can't remember, the ones we saw. So Adidas do a 3D printed sneaker version, for example, which is quite popular mainstream. Another way of 3D, oh God, that's quite spacey stuff. Go to this one here, this one. So this is another 3D printed fashion project. So something completely different, a little bit more spacey-like, but I think that's a really interesting one to look at because designers need to think outside the box. And if you were here for the education lecture in the beginning, we need to start learning to anticipate the consequences of what we do and adapt to those. So we need to start educating ourselves based on future scenarios. Here, the future scenarios as sea levels are rising. There are places which will be underwater. This designer came up with something which will, next one, which will allow you to live underwater as a human being. Now, hopefully it may not come to it, but if you think about yourself as a fashion designer, you suddenly do not design for, oh, the lady must look pretty. You design for a purpose, for a scenario which might well be there. None of us foreseen COVID, but we had to redesign our lives around it. And if you have that skill, if you're educated in a way that you can redesign based on what is happening in the future, then you are a lot more resilient as a species, and you'll also be able to avoid a lot of those future scenarios because you thought about what might be able to happen. Okay, next one. Yeah, look at this. Who would wear this? Public transport? Get away from me. Interesting. Yeah, here's one of these 3D knitted ones, and I think there's a picture of the sneaker as well. Okay. Maybe you've seen those. Very interesting. Remember the beginning when we talked about this honeycomb lecture? Another really, really good example of biomimicry, of looking at structures and patterns in nature and then adapting them, because that's where that comes from that sole, which apparently is really, really healthy to walk on because it's got that spring just because it's been arranged in a certain way. And then a whole area which, again, I think is really interesting in terms of sustainability. A lot of you guys are in that era of Instagram. And we've now already have companies changing their rules about returning items. I think it was ASOS who stopped the free return because they discovered that most of their clients buy products just for that one Instagram photo and then returned it as saying, oh, it's not for me. If you could do that whole, the swap it up lady was talking about when you're young, and may I say that's a bit ageist, it's not just when you're young, when you like experimenting with clothes, with style, with design, You want to refresh. You don't always want to wear the same thing. What if you could do that digitally? What if you could have an avatar, which is you, and then you design clothes for that? And that already happens. Some cinema films are only really popular and really famous because they do that digital fashion stuff. So I think there's one example here. Go to that. No, sorry, next one. This one, I can't claim that I've seen it, but this whole 3D modeling software, again, if you're thinking about fashion design, start using Procreate on the iPad. I've recently really increasingly using it. It's the next, I think, big thing in fashion is to think about the whole digital realm instead of needing raw materials and producing it. Because if you think about it, what is the big deal with fashion? Why do we feel, maybe not everyone, but a lot of us, that we need so many clothes? It's not a need, is it? There is something in us which likes the idea of playing with how we feel, how we relate, how we react to others according to how they look, how they react to us. We don't need to go to nature and say, give, 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 so we can make, to satisfy that human need of creativity, of experimenting, of socializing, because that is at the core of fashion. Why fashion is so popular, because of our need to be creative, to play around and experiment, and to socialize with each other. We do not need big factories for that. We can do that online 3D. And that was it. Fashion Revolution Kazakhstan. So if it was a little bit higgledy-piggledy, remember that was not my presentation, but the young lady who was supposed to do it had to fly back. Any questions? I think we've got 5 minutes yet.
Any
Yeah,
questions?
no, go for it.
To go on the back of the
To go on the back of the 3D
there's also a
show.
software called
There's
Flow.
also a software called
Instead of
Flow.
pattern cutting physically,
Instead of
you
pattern
can model it
cutting
physically and
you
avoid
can
all
model
the
it
process of
physically
pattern
and avoid
cutting.
all
We talked, what was the designer, Penelope? Help me out. We looked at that. That is when suddenly pattern cutting uses every centimeter of the fabric, and you can use a computer program where the cutting out plan looks like a maze, basically. But because you can use the computer, oh God, this is a really famous designer. And they make the most amazing clothes. And if you look at how they cut their pattern, it's a completely new way of pattern cutting with the help of a computer program. Julian Robert did subtraction cutting. That is like, instead of putting shapes onto a fabric, extracting shapes out of a fabric, and that's what gets the design. Ah.
Constructing triangles and hexagons, and so you manipulate these triangles and hexagons, and it's like you zoom out, and it's like on zoom out and zoom out. You grab, you click on a bit, pull it, display that scene. It's like tiny plasticine
Wow.
on the screen.
Yeah. You know what? I'm really excited about this whole modular design where you have literally little pieces which you link together, and there is already some 3D fashion being made. And the idea of the designer behind it was, what if you go traveling? Seems a little bit ridiculous that we carry big suitcases around with us from one place to the other just to have clothes in it. What if you could have make modular pieces, and you could almost custom print your holiday outfit when you're there out of a biodegradable 3D printable material, which you then afterwards throw into the compost, and you just fly with your hand luggage. And this idea of having small pieces which can take on any form you want it, because the problem with 3D printing at the moment often is the size of the 3D printer. But if you do modular, you kind of, sorry, I interrupted you.
There is sometimes some waste depending on the 3D
Yeah.
has support structure. And my tutor was meant to AB was looking into grinders that was a coating mechanism and grinders so that it would re-extrude and then make it the old and then make it officially and then they were collecting body sops
To turn them into the filament to, yeah. Again, what a fantastic use. Plastic bottle, turn it into a filament, and you've got your 3D printing materials. Any other questions? Feedback, remarks, exciting things to share.
Just to share that I've got a skateboard.
Fantastic. Can you skateboard? Fantastic. Skateboard, yeah, true. Skateboards out of fishing nets. Yeah. Anyone else? Anyone else?
I'd just like to sort of say it's wonderful to hear of this positive, intuitive, imaginative approach. You know, and it transcends textiles. I mean, any area of one's living and life with that sort of innovative, imaginative intuition. I think we've all got a capacity of kind of tapping into a gut reaction or common sense, which you don't have to learn at uni, or it doesn't have to be judged with an exam. You know, you're sourcing, you're almost, you know, it's a strength that humans have. Which I mean, who's ever heard of a class in intuition at uni even, or an exam? You know, but you're encouraging us to develop our faculties, which you know are actually absent very often in the educational system. You know, in a way, you're re-educating us to you know learn from ourselves.
And if you find that exciting, that kind of stuff, or the stuff we talked earlier about education, go out and tell people. If you're at school, talk about STEAM. Ask about to be taught about stuff like that. Learn with your teachers, because I'm a teacher. I'm a design and technology teacher. Penelope knows something I don't know. For me, the most exciting thing about doing 20 years of Little Hands is I can't afford to stop learning. Because if I do, then suddenly all the Penelopes in the room know more than I do, and I surely cannot let that happen. There should also still always be something I can do and say, which you guys don't know yet, and the other way around. And that kind of working with each other is what I try to bring across, that the world is an immensely exciting place. Challenges are there to be solved. And if you have a common purpose and you do it together, then things like eco-anxiety just shrink on its own. Anyway, we have to stop because apparently there is now a really exciting theatre performance of one of the Sustainable Development Goals stories happening, which brings us back full circle to what we started this morning about educating ourselves within the framework of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you very much.